Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it is yet another video in my 2023 NFL offseason prediction series, and today we're covering the Las Vegas Raiders. Make sure to leave a thumbs up and a subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss anything in this series. I'm going to try to cover all 32 teams before the Super Bowl. It's a tall task. There's less days than there are teams to cover, and I'm trying my best, and the Vegas Raiders are also trying their best because it seems like they are in need of the biggest position you could have on a team, and that is the quarterback position. So we're going to experiment a bit with what might happen to Derek Carr. If you saw my previous one with the New York Jets, you might have a somewhat of an idea of what I was thinking for Derek Carr going forward. But I guess the question at this point is who's going to replace him. We know that Josh McDaniels is going to be on for another year unless something changes in the next day or so, but it seems like a lot of the head coaches that were going to get fired have either been brought up or have been fired outright, like Lovie Smith, Cliff Kingsbury. So McDaniels is going to be looking for somebody to fill in that role. And we've seen Davante Adams, who went there specifically for Derek Carr, and he has said that he is looking forward to staying with the Raiders and working with a quarterback who he can build long-term chemistry with. So I think that that is some sort of insight into what Davante Adams is wanting out of this team, and now he has pretty much solidified himself as probably the best player on the team. I think it's him and Max Crosby are the ones that have the claims for that. So is it going to be Tom Brady? Is it going to be Jimmy Garoppolo? I don't think it is. I think it's going to be somebody they can count on to be there for maybe 5, 6, 7 more seasons, and neither one of those guys seems to be at the liberty of providing that many years for them. They have a very, very good cap situation, though. It's very fluid, kind of like what we saw with the New York Jets in the previous video that I dropped, where there's a lot of room for movement here. And outside of like one or two guys, there's not really any big contracts they're going to be giving out. They're going to be shedding more money than they are adding to their cap, lowering their cap, that is. Giving them a little bit of movement in the actual free agency market to address a couple of needs, which we get to as well. But I guess the only thing we can start with is what they're doing at the head coaching position and the rankings they had this season on offense and defense. So, of course, we're going to start with the head coach, Josh McDaniels. Came over from the New England Patriots last year, and it was an interesting year for the Raiders. There's, I think, a lot of context you can put towards what happened to the Raiders this season. There was a lot of blown leads for the Raiders. They could have finished with a much better record than what they did. And I think that Derek Carr kind of got thrown under the bus a bit as a scapegoat, because generally when you have big leads late in games and then you blow them, a lot of that has to do with the coach and the coaching staff, and how they prepare you, and how they scheme out a game, and how they finish out the game plan, and how they play call the rest of the way through. And the way that the Raiders were structured, you can see that maybe they weren't the best defensive team, like in terms of how they engaged with their front four despite all the money they spent. But their offense wasn't really going out there and finishing games. And to me, that is on the head coach. And I think that there might be a shorter leash than people think on Josh McDaniels going into next season. But if we look at some of the offensive rankings here, they were 12th in points, 11th in passing yards, 9th in passing touchdowns. And here's a startling stat. Despite having the man who won the rushing title this year for the most yards in the season was Josh Jacobs, they were still 17th in rushing yards and 23rd in rushing touchdowns, which means there wasn't any type of production outside of Josh Jacobs. And that, I think, also is kind of a concern, because you want to have a good complementary back, especially in the modern NFL where a running back's lifeline and lifespan is not that big. You know, they were 11th in total yards, 12th in total touchdowns, but I think that here's where their struggles seem to be very clear, and they were 16th in third down percentage, right in the middle league, but 26th in red zone efficiency. They were not finishing off drives very strong. Now, is that play calling? Is that a lack of variety in the run game, with teams kind of knowing, okay, take Josh Jacobs away, then what do they have? And, they had Darren Waller and Devontae Adams. You would think they would be a lot more efficient in the red zone. So to me, that might be a play calling issue. So maybe Josh McDaniels has to reevaluate how he does things. Maybe it's him just didn't have the right faith in Derek Carr. He wasn't in love with Carr when he came over to the Raiders. It was clear that there was some sort of agenda to get Brady there. I don't know if that's still true. I don't think it is. And we'll get to that eventually. But another startling thing about this team was the defense. And the defense had spent a lot of money on bringing in Chandler Jones to have a great 1-2 punch as edge rushers. And I, in my preseason deep dive power ranking series, had them as ranked as one of the best edge duos in the league. But they, as a team, were 30th in sacks, 26th in red zone percentage, 30th in red zone percentage. This is absolutely horrific. 29th in pass yards. This team was built to make passing the ball harder for their opponents. Now you can say they didn't have all the corners because they really didn't have corners on this team. Rock Ya-Sin, Sidney Jones, Anthony Everett, Amik Robertson. They were all kind of worked in there a bit, but they just couldn't find a true alpha there. You can say you can blame it on that, but if you look at Chandler Jones and his pressure rates, it just wasn't there. It really wasn't there. And it's gotten the talks of they need to maybe get another edge rusher in that room to maybe take a bit of the heat off of Chandler Jones and get somebody there that can help out Max Crosby, who still managed to have a good year. But imagine he could have had a so much better year. He probably could have had a Nick Bosa level year if he had a complement on the other side that was producing. And Chandler Jones just wasn't that. And to allow that many yards and this many touchdowns, really across the board here, and that many points, it really puts you at a deficit that would have been very difficult to overcome, especially when you were so poor in red zone percentage and on third down. You can't be poor in red zone percentage on offense and also be poor on red zone efficiency on defense. That's how you end up in the position the Raiders are in, which is the 7th worst team in the NFL. You can't be that bad on defense with third down and sacks and expect to win too many games, because it's almost the third down percentage, the sack totals, and the point totals almost coincide with each other completely. They're all intermingled, because if you can't get off the field, then you're going to get scored on and you're not going to have a lot of time to come back. Teams are going to be able to play defense a lot differently on you, and then you're not going to be able to use your best player, one of your best players, that is, because your best player is Devontae Adams, your other best, Josh Jacobs, who clearly, when he was put in a position to succeed, he dominated. But imagine if he was able to get the ball more because you were more efficient on defense, because you were more efficient on offense and being able to score and being able to have some leads where you can run the ball more. And then Josh Jacobs maybe would have gotten to 1,800 yards. Who knows? But this is something where they drastically need to improve. And I think it really starts with being able to break down the opposing team's pocket, not make the quarterbacks comfortable. You are playing in a division that has Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. You need to cause chaos for those guys. So that's something that needs to really be focused on for them going forward. But they have all the resources to do it, and it's with a starting cap of $34.6 million. Now that gives you a lot of access for re-signing players, and going out and getting guys in free agency. And we're going to start with the one that we know is going to happen from the reports, and that is running back Josh Jacobs is going to come back. I got him at $13.5 million cap hit on the first year. That would make him, I believe, the 4th highest paid running back in the NFL. Only Zeke, Kamara, and Henry would be making more money than him. I believe those are the 3, because 2 of them make 15, the other one makes 16.5. So I would think he would come back on that because he wants to come back at a reasonable price for everybody. And I don't think coming back as the highest paid running back would be in his best interest. I think they'd be more inclined to just tag him at that point for a $12 million cap hit. But I think paying him more than what the franchise tag would be a sign of good faith, I think, in the negotiating space. And you have Foster Moreau with a $4 million cap hit, sort of like that middle of the line number 2 tight end. In an offense that Josh McDaniels likes using 2 tight ends. Foster Moreau had some pretty decent games out there, and you want to use Darren Waller in different ways anyway. I also saw Natane Moody was on their roster list, and I thought that bringing him back at $1.5 million was a bargain. He's had some injury concerns, but I think that he's somebody that could really fit in if he can put a couple of healthy off seasons together. He could be a real asset for this team that is in desperate need of some linemen. And then I saw the two corners, and I see Rocky Sin and Sidney Jones. Neither was making that much money, and really neither was graded particularly like an elite level. But I think that this is a situation where you can bring them back on maybe a team-friendly deal, two guys for $8 million that can play corner, and you never know what you're going to get. Sidney Jones has played really well in the past. He had some good years with Philadelphia, and then he went to, I believe it was, he had like a re-breakout for either Jacksonville or Seattle, and then he went to one of those teams, and he never really picked it back up again. But he's somebody, if you can get him for a low amount of money, you might be able to pull something out of him there. And then we got the restructuring of Darren Waller, frees up $7.5 million in cap savings, somebody that you want to keep around. And then, of course, trading Derek Carr. It's a $29.2 million cap savings, not a lot of dead money. And you can probably get a third-round pick this year and then maybe a first next year, maybe a conditional first next year, depending on how well the team does. I think it might look like a bit of a Carson Wentz deal just because you showed your hand that you were for sure be getting rid of Derek Carr. So I think teams are going to be less inclined to give up high levels of draft capital. Had they just sat back with Carr and then made it seem like they're, we're pulling our leg to trade him, I think they might have gotten more value out of him if they had just done that. But with all those moves, they actually increased their money, $44 million in spending cap. Boy, I'm a good general manager. How about that? Now, what are their team needs? $44 million to fill out the rest of your team needs. And you got the quarterback position. Of course, the quarterback position. It has to be. It's the number one thing you trade away your starting quarterback. You also need a wide receiver that can play on the outside. You've got Devontae Adams. You got Hunter Renfrow to play in the slot. You need a complement out there on the outside. You had Keelan Cole, Mac Hollins. You want somebody more solid. Somebody with more of an upside to that. I am yawning out here, guys. It is a late night. But the O-line, also you're in need of that. You've seen a lot of turnover for them. Alex Leatherwood, probably the most disappointing of that. And then pretty much every level of your defense. I could have just put defense because interior defensive line, edge, linebacker, corner, and safety, you need pretty much everything. Pretty much everything you need. So you got to swing at a bunch of stuff. You got to. I mean, that makes it so, in a weird way, it's a blessing because now you can pretty much go best player available during the draft probably. And then whatever you don't get, and you go into that second wave of free agency after the draft and pick up what you don't have. So it's a blessing in that sense, but also yikes, because you don't want to be a team with these many needs. You just don't. Ugh. Oh no. But I picked out 4 free agency targets, and we'll start with the wide receiver Alan Lazard, $8 million cap hit. He sent out a thing on social media saying he was done with Green Bay. So there you go. He can be somebody that can play on the outside. He does play in the slot sometimes, but he's 6'5". You can use him as an outside receiver there. Maybe try to get a team-friendly deal, though. And then Derek Nady, $3.5 million cap hit, interior defensive lineman from the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's always nice to bring in a division rivals players. And then Cole Holcomb, $5 million cap hit, 5.5 the linebacker. I mean, he is a replacement level starter, fringe starter, but when you're that desperate for that position, you kind of leave yourself open to have to make these kinds of moves, and it's still an upgrade. Temporary upgrade, but still an upgrade. And then Sean Murphy-Bunting, $16 million cap hit. That's your big free agency signing. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers corner graded out really well, had some injury concerns a bit, but you throw him out there and you've immediately upgraded your cornerback room that you're in desperate need of. And also by doing this, it allows you to maybe go after positions in the draft that don't have as much depth as the cornerback class does this year, because I think there's a lot of good corners coming out in this draft. But then you got some interior defensive linemen that may not be, there's a lot of like tiering in that sense. You know, you got the top one, Jalen Carter, you're never going to get. Then you could probably contemplate Brian Breezy if he gets past the Detroit Lions. But you might want to go with the offensive lineman in that case. You might want to trade back and maybe try to snipe a guy like Brian Branch in the late teens, depending how far you can trade back and pick up more draft picks. Or you do the logical thing and you just stay there at 7 and you draft Will Levis. But if you don't love Will Levis and you love somebody else, maybe you wait to take your quarterback on day 2. There's some pretty decent quarterbacks, and we'll get into that very soon. But after those top 4 signings, they have $11.7 million to fill out the rest of the roster and sign their draft picks. Now, you can restructure probably 1 or 2 other deals, free up a couple mil there, a couple mil here, and really give yourself a little bit more space to maybe pick up a higher level veteran that may end up becoming available after the draft that you weren't expecting. There's always guys that get done dirty like that miss out on that first wave of free agency and then get sent into that second wave and end up having to sign like these bargain deals. But it's still 11.7, still a good amount. And here is their draft strategy, and I picked out the 2 quarterbacks that really fit the McDaniel system best, Will Levis and Tanner McKee. If you don't fall in love with Will Levis, or maybe Will Levis and Tanner McKee you have graded relatively close, maybe you don't take Will Levis in the first and you just go for Tanner McKee in the second. You use that opportunity in the first round to maybe trade back or just take the best other non-quarterback player on your board available. You know, whether it be an offensive lineman like Paris Johnson or Peter Skoronski, whether it be some more front 4 depth, maybe you like Tyree Wilson and he's there. Maybe Brian Breezy gets to you. Maybe. Or it says draft a safety to complement Trevon Merrick. Like I said, trade back into the teens to a team maybe trying to be aggressive to come up for a quarterback like Will Levis. And then maybe take Brian Branch. Or you wait until the second round. Maybe you trade back up into the first and you grab Antonio Johnson. There's a couple possibilities there for you to grab that position early on. But you're really in a position where it's, like I said, it's very difficult to screw this up. Very difficult to screw up this draft for them. They pretty much can justify anyone they take there in the first 2-3 rounds. And then on day 3, it's sort of like, okay, now you got depth positions you got to figure out. So you should be taking those positions. But the first 2 days of the draft, man, just go the best player available on the board every single time, and you just really can't go wrong with this Raiders team. And I expect them to hopefully clean up the mistakes they made this season that cost them so many games, which is just not being able to close games out. That was their main issue. Had they been able to close games out, they probably would have made the playoffs as like a 10-win team. So there is some positives coming out here, and I think the draft can really help solidify this team and hopefully turn that part of their game around. And there it is, my offseason predictions for the Las Vegas Raiders. I want you to leave in the comment section below what you think of what I did with the old Raiders. And, of course, thumbs up the video and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It's the easiest, freest, and quickest way to support this channel and me. Try to put a lot of work into this. And I appreciate you guys coming here, watching the video, and I appreciate you guys coming back for the next one. And I'll see you then.